Good morning, everybody. Is the sound okay? All right. So let me just start by saying thank you for inviting me to be here today. I know this is perhaps not the type of people I normally present to. I had some thoughts this morning about whether I should wear a uniform so I could have my vest on. But, I think in the spirit of collaboration and of working together towards some common goals, I'm in a suit. So, I know some of you have heard me speak at the RICO AGM, so please indulge me in what might be a bit repetitive in some of the things I say, but I think it's important that we all start with a foundation of knowledge about what the Cannabis Enforcement Team is, what it does, and how it's going to hopefully continue to help with the battle against the illegal cannabis market. So in that long title, Provincial Joint Forces Cannabis Enforcement Team, there's the Provincial Joint Forces, JFO. What that means is that although it's led by the OPP, we have representatives on our team from municipal agencies that include Windsor, Durham, Niagara, London, the AGCO. It's a collaborative effort of both provincial and municipal resources. We used to be much bigger. We're a very small group right now, but we've received some incredible funding that is going to see us grow again, and I'll speak to that in a couple of minutes. So going back to our roots, this team was erected in 2018 to coincide with the legalization of cannabis. In that first year, 2019, there were approximately 215 illegal stores across the province. And so, although it doesn't really align with the mandate of the team, that first year was spent trying to bring in the illegal storefront market down to a negligible, if any, amount. So in that first year, 79 stores were closed, and a large number of them closed of their own accord. Some of them went into the legal framework, and others just shut down. So the market was really quite manageable at the beginning of 2020, and we refocused our enforcement efforts towards the production, distribution, trafficking, the organized crime level of the illegal cannabis market. And I am going to admit the problem has resurfaced with a vengeance. And so we find ourselves now putting more emphasis back on enforcement against brick and mortar illegal storefronts. Currently, we feel there are about 115 illegal stores in the province of Ontario, and most of those are in the city of Toronto. There's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll touch upon that as well. But we have I don't know how much of it you're following in the media, but you'll have noticed particularly since about May or June, there's been concerted enforcement efforts on chains of illegal storefronts in the Niagara area, London area, and within the GTA to a certain extent. Again, that's a little bit of a different, complicated problem there. So there is some enforcement work going on. I'm going to talk for a second about the whole Indigenous versus non-Indigenous piece in the whole ownership of an unlicensed store. There seems to be a misconception out there that if a store is owned or operated by a person or persons with Indigenous ties, they do not need a license. This is completely false. The licensed regime does not make a distinction between Indigenous and non-Indigenous ownership. They need to be licensed by the AGCO. Now, I'm talking about stores that are located off reserve. Stores that are on a reserve have a little bit of a different framework that we need to be mindful of. But once a store opens up off reserve, they are subject to the same expectations, regulations, and legal registrations that they need to operate. This is not my opinion. It is one that is supported by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, which prosecutes offenses for us. And so we have their support. We're able to investigate and, where relevant and applicable, lay charges for operating an illegal storefront, even if there is this Indigenous banner around it. That may change at some point in the future. We have no case law on it. So some of the stores that I mentioned earlier that have been shut down through the course of the summer were under that Indigenous banner, and it'll be interesting to see how these things progress in court and what sort of guiding principles our judiciary gives us when we're dealing with the really complex matter of Indigenous ownership and sovereign rights. The other misconception that often ties into the Indigenous considerations is the presence of illegal tobacco. What we're finding is that in our unlicensed storefronts, we are often seeing unregulated, unlicensed tobacco being sold as well. Some seem to believe that as long as you don't have tobacco in your store, you're going to be okay to sell just cannabis. It's all false. These are all offenses under different pieces of legislation. My team works with the Cannabis Act and the Cannabis Control Act, and the cannabis side comes under the Tobacco Tax Act. So all that means is if we find both products at those locations, it opens up a wider scope of legislation under which to lay charges. Any police officer anywhere in the province of Ontario can lay a charge under any of those acts. So you don't need a special designation. What's lacking perhaps is knowledge. Some of our officers don't understand what their discretionary rights are, what authorities they have, and that's on us to continue to educate. But you don't need a member of the cannabis team or of the contraband tobacco enforcement team to lay those charges. It can be your local police officer. All right, so up on the slide, you'll see that the types of enforcement activities that we are currently engaged in is some of the illegal storefronts, which, like I said, really isn't part of our mandate, especially the one-offs, but we find ourselves pushed back into that realm because of the need, and we're trying to pivot and be reactionary to what our constituents in our different communities are in need of. We also have an illegal online sales enforcement that is going to be enhanced through some funding that we recently got, and I'll talk about that in a second. And lastly, not lastly in priority, but the third thing we deal with up until recently was our priority was illegal production and distribution. For the LPs in the room, you know, that is something that continues to be a problem, not just on the Ontario side, but the amount of product that gets exported out of Ontario to other provinces, to the US and abroad. Our international partners are not very happy with the amount of product they're seeing coming out of Canada and Ontario specifically, so we have this international obligation to address that issue. So the funding. Some of you, all of you, will have heard that we got a lot of money given to us, we being the cannabis enforcement team as part of the OPP. Back in April, it was announced that we were going to get upwards of $30 million to beef up the enforcement efforts. So that funding announcement was made in April. The money sort of trickled down through Treasury Board approvals through the early parts of the summer. And now we're building our staffing models to get back to those 2019 numbers that we had, with teams that are deployed across the province and better able to deal with priorities at a tighter jurisdictional level locally when they come up. Right now our team is quite small. It's one team, about 8 people, and so their ability to respond to priorities across the province is really challenging. There's more work than they can possibly take on, and so there's always things that are being left on the table that we're trying to get our municipal partners or our local detachments where it's an OPP jurisdiction to try to deal with at a more local level. I'd like to use the analogy for a second, if you'll indulge me. This is not actually happening in my life, but hypothetically, if I have a home that I wish to renovate and expand to accommodate my ability to host more people, there are many, many, many steps involved in that, right? First, there's the ability for me to get money to do that project. Then I've got to get permits and approvals and drawings, and then I can start to build, and then I can start to plan for how am I going to use this space. Am I going to have 80 people all at one time in my house, or am I going to have 4 or 5 smaller little gatherings to test this out? This is sort of what I'm dealing with right now. I've got this big influx of money, about $10 million a year. That $30 million is a 3-year funding proposal. And I can't just go out and spend it. In many areas of business, if you need 10 accountants because your firm is expanding, you place an ad, you hire 10 accountants. You can't hire police officers the same way. The type of officers that work on a cannabis team like ours are experienced, seasoned police officers. They're not the new graduates from the Ontario Police College. So we are hiring from within, and that means an impact to the front line. So the people that respond to the 911 calls. We have to be very careful about how we impact the front line. So we're only allowed to staff in very staggered and measured approaches. So I suspect that a year, when the year anniversary of the funding announcement comes out and people ask us for what have you done with the money, I think there's going to be a bit of disappointed that more hasn't been done. What I'd like to reassure you is that we are excited by the funding. We have priorities and goals set up. We're working closely with the AGCO and the OCS to see how we can collaborate to get those enforcement pieces operationalized as quickly as we can within that whole bureaucracy of government. Right? There's no other way to say it. There are many layers, and we're working through them to get there. So up on the slide right now is just an example of one of the ways we convinced government that these are good investments. To put money into enforcement not only deals with that illegal market, but it actually brings money back into the province for use in a variety of ways. So those are 2 historical projects. They were heavily staffed with a lot of resources. So you can see Project Cairns and Project Woolwich. You can see what those investigations cost us to run. You look at those numbers and you think, how do you get there? Well, this is everything from personnel power to vehicles to technology to court prep. In the end, that's what those 2 investigations cost us. And if we go into the next slide, please. You'll see in the end, this is what the results were. This is, in our world of contraband, how we measure what the result was financially. We take into consideration the fines that were levied, the forfeitures. So that means, did we have any assets that we seized that were then forfeited back to us? And what was the tax loss to government? That's considered part of the success formula. And you can see that although they cost us millions of dollars, what they brought back in was also off the charts in terms of what the government sees coming back into Ontario coffers. So I guess I know we're going to move into more of a panel discussion where some of these concepts will get broadened upon, but one of the things that I saw, when I was reviewing what the goal of this summit was, is that it's an opportunity to connect and elevate and grow together. What I'm here to tell you is that your law enforcement communities, although they are constantly juggling with different priorities, they are committed to upholding the law. And sometimes you're not seeing that in your day-to-day enforcement against the illegal store that operates right next door to you or across the street. I can tell you that it's on the radar of your local police chiefs. There's different approaches being taken all across the province, and there's a lot of reasons for that. At the end of the day, the OPP is there to support our municipal partners with both advice and resources depending on their needs and interest levels, but your local police service is going to make a decision for itself on how it wishes to deal with the problem. And the work of your groups, like this one, like RICO, is immeasurable in them understanding the importance of this particular priority. So you're being heard. I have no doubt that the lobbying and pushing that you're doing with your local politicians, your police services, were instrumental in the end for us helping to get the funding that we got. And I ask your patience as we continue to build this addition to the House, that we do it right, and so that we can get back to those numbers of 2019 in holding accountable those who are choosing to operate within the illegal market. I was really encouraged by the optimism of the first panel and seeing all the really good things that are happening out there and continuing to embrace those and celebrate those successes. I think in the end, we all have the same goal, perhaps for different reasons, but we all want to see this illegal market at very least disrupted significantly. I don't know that we can ever totally eradicate it, but something does need to be done. We know that, and we're hearing you, and we're always open to suggestions on how we can do better in that space, and forums like this are a great first step towards that. So I am going to pass the mic back. I'm going to be part of the next panel, I believe, right? So if more specific questions come up, we can address them.
Thanks, Anne.